Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the weekly webinar series, Embracing Change. Today, we have a special guest, Dr. Gino Yu, a dear friend who I met actually at TED Global in 2014 in Rio de Janeiro. Gino, you want to get your video and audio up? And so he's an associate professor at the university here, and sometimes very difficult to keep track of. So Gino has promised that he's going to stay very, very grounded during this webinar conversation that we're going to have on personal development, mental health, maybe consciousness, and a few other things. So welcome, Gino. Thank you very much for taking the time this evening to be here with us, and welcome everybody for being here, including some of you in the United States, I recognize. So Gino, want to give a little, what is personal development from your perspective, and how does it relate to mental health and experience? Maybe we just go step by step. So welcome, Gino.
Thanks. Yeah, so I have a background in electrical engineering and computer science. I've been in digital entertainment for about 30 years. But then the last 15 years, I do research in consciousness and phenomenology and neurophysiology, which is very different from electrical engineering and computer science. And what happened with me was when I was a grad student at Berkeley, I ended up getting a couple papers accepted to different conferences, and I ended up traveling around the world. And at that time, the TWA had one direction. You can fly as many flights as you like in one direction at a fixed cost. And at the time, I was a starving student and only had $1,000 cash and no credit card. And that time I traveled around, and wherever you go, and for me, it was probably the most significant thing that happened to me in my life up until that point. And you'd go, you'd see different cultures, you have different people with completely different backgrounds, different genetics, different autobiographical histories, different culture. But if you kind of make eye contact with them, you feel like you can connect with them. And so although you don't speak the same language or anything, you're able to make a connection. And so that led into this inquiry is, what is it that's the commonality of man that allows people to connect? And if you think about it, everyone's born, everyone dies, and while they're alive, they have to deal with themselves. And so, and the thing that usually, what happens with us is we're born into an experience, and our experiences shape our worldview, and then our worldview influences our behavior, and our behavior and the results of our behavior influence how we feel and how we think, and influence the physiology. And so that led into this interest in consciousness. And then what happened with me is I explored this for several years after I got back, and I'll get into it a little more later. But in 1992, I had an awakening experience, which I had no idea what that was. And then from there, our whole family started doing Qigong. And then about 10 years later, my sister had a Vedanta teacher that was running a workshop, and my sister invited me to attend as well. It was a 3-day workshop. And at the workshop, he started explaining all of this stuff, which I was familiar with already from this awakening experience that I had. And that kind of led this shift into research in consciousness. Now, when I met you, the interesting thing is, again, I look at things from the perspective of physiology, the nature of the talk and the work that I do, looking at it very much from the perspective of electrical engineer. And so physically, you're in your home. Physically, I'm in our study room right now. And our bodies, and I guess the audience is located around the world, and your bodies are like the hardware. And this conversation in your experience of the moment is metaphorically analogous to the software. And so if I mention, let's see, your office in Wan Chai and the secret room that you have, and you know what I mean, are there certain neurons in my brain that are kind of wired like yours? So what is this relationship between this mental space and the physical body, which is kind of analogous to hardware and software? Now, the interesting thing, and the thing that got me really excited when I first met you, is because you summarize it fairly wonderfully in your book, but you went through a transformation, and the way that you were thinking and your stress influenced your physiology. And you went through this experience, and you had your, I'd like to say, although it's, pardon the religious denomination of it, you had your come to Jesus meeting where, it was a life or death situation. And then you really got serious and flipped around and then created GNet Care, realizing this mind-body relationship, realizing that a lot of the people that are kind of, because of the culture that they've been imposed upon through society or through family responsibilities and all of this other stuff, it's a big weight on their shoulder that they then internalize that influences physiology. And I think part of what you're trying to do with your company and one of your main missions now is to help people get more aware of that and realize that, hey, these burdens that you have psychologically and the battles that you're fighting and the things that you're trying to maintain are influencing your physiology and the physiological processes. And then it spans the metaphysics a bit in that then, things break down and, there is that relationship and you're trying to raise awareness around that, which is wonderful. And that's kind of the research that we do. And so, again, are we okay so far? Or?
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, that's, looking at the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the relational, and you're putting it all together in that space, right? That's what we want to understand.
But if you look at things from the physiological perspective, from purely the perspective of physiology, and then let me show you how I came around this from the area of digital entertainment. So I was at USC, I was teaching, I founded the multimedia program in the engineering school there. I run the multimedia program at the Hong Kong Polytechnic as well too. And then arguably where we're at right now in this conversation is where you're at when you watch a movie. And for some of you that are literally watching this on TV, on your computer, it's kind of like watching a movie or playing a video game or reading a book. Something in your mind here influences how you feel and how you think. Now, if you look at things from the perspective of physiology, what's actually happening when you're playing a video game or watching a movie? You're watching some symbols on a screen. You have some relationship with those symbols. These things, something happens on the screen, which then regulate your affect, which regulate your emotional system, and which then is influencing your biochemistry and everything. And so the way I look at video games is when you're playing a video game, although it's an intense video game, and whether it's Tetris or whether it's some RPG or some from first-person shooter, all you're really doing is you're regulating the autonomic nervous system, and you're getting a hit of dopamine every now and then. If you think about what's happening in the body, although it's like, oh no, yes, we won, yes, woohoo, we won the game, but what's actually happening physiologically is you're getting a hit, of dopamine on all of this. Or, oh, I'm about to die, oh shoot, and this whole anxiety. All of that is just a regulation of what's going on in your body. And that's what's happening. That's how I interpret you looking at playing a video game or watching a movie. And so I can measure your brain, I can measure your heart rate variability, your skin response, and all of this as you're watching the film. And by seeing how you respond in a video game and how your physiology responds, you're actually telling me a lot about who you are, what your values are, and what experiences you might have had in the past to create that worldview. Now, the thing that I look at this is that if you take this one step further, what's actually happening when you're experiencing the real world? It's a similar thing in that what's happening is you're meeting people, things are happening. Oh, my company, my CFO just left with all the money or whatever. You have some stories that are influencing you that are then heavily regulating how you feel. And all of that, it's similar to a video game, similar. And so the premise is that the underlying physiological processes, it's using the same hardware, thought and your experience of the moment through the senses. Now, there's a term called phenomenology, which is your experience of the moment right now. And if I look at all of you, including yourself, if you look at what's happening, all there is to everything in the entire universe at any one moment from the perspective of your awareness, all there is to everything in the entire moment is just what you know from your senses. And for me, it's this, I'm in our kids' study room right now. I'm just kind of showing you. So I'm in this room here, And then you seem to be in a room with white curtains behind you. And so there's what's physically around you. There's how your body feels, whether you're hungry, thirsty, or have to go to the bathroom. And there's what you know from the conditioned mind and thought in this mental realm. And so this conversation and my discussion here is happening in this mental realm. Yes? And so you seem to be wearing a pink shirt. You have the white curtains behind you. You're wearing glasses. And for me, I have a fork in my hand here. Does this fork exist? How do I know? Yes. How do I know this exists? Because I can see it. I can feel it. I can touch it. I can taste it. And so I know that this is here from my senses. Whether I'm hungry or thirsty, it's an internal process. Whether I have to go to the bathroom or fart or something like that, I have some sensations that are coming from my physiology, and there's what's happening in this mental space. And arguably everything in the entire universe at any one moment, through what's, from the perspective of your physiology, it's just what's physically around you. There's how your body feels, and there's what you know from this mental realm. And so for you guys right now, I don't know, can you hear a flute sound?
Yeah.
Okay, so that flute sound is my daughter playing the flute. And is that happening right now? And arguably, yes, and I know it's from my senses, versus this mental realm. Now, the issue is that this mental realm, the internal processes, and my experience of the moment through the senses uses the same hardware. It uses the same endocrine system, which regulate my hormones, and it uses the same autonomic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response. But the big issue is your awareness doesn't know the difference. Your awareness doesn't know the difference. And all the cells in your body, all of the biochemistry and all the chemicals that are going on, all of your cells don't know the difference between the stimuli coming from what's coming from here versus what's coming from what's physically around you. Now, the thing about this is if you can bring yourself fully present so that your autonomic nervous system is only triggered by what's physically threatening you, which from an evolutionary psychology perspective was why it was developed. The reason I still exist and you still exist is because our early ancestors were very good at escaping predators and everything and staying alive. And that's because they were physically threatened and they were able to survive that. And so they were developed to keep us physically safe. But the thing is, as we started developing the thinking process, the mental realm, it uses the same underlying physiological mechanisms, and your awareness doesn't know the difference. So if you can bring yourself fully present, arguably for most of the people that are listening and yourself included, if you bring yourself fully present right here and right now, I'm just sitting in our study talking to my computer. And right now, everything's fine. And the natural state is joy. And so where is fear, frustration, anger, and anxiety and worry coming from? Arguably, it's coming from this mental realm. And my interpretation of this experience through this mental condition that's regulating and influencing my biochemistry and my emotional state. Okay? And so the first thing about mindfulness, meditation, and all of these practices is, can you let the connection between these strong emotions tied to symbols and these natural process, can you relax that and kind of let that go? Yeah. Now, the talk that I proposed, here is this personal development, mental health, and human potential is based upon a model that we have of personal development and the ontology, the framing of reality from that. The basic ontology from this model is that all there is what's physically around you, how your body feels, and there's what you know from this mental realm and thought. And if you don't mind, I'd like to run this through by you very quickly.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Are we okay so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so it turns out, if there are any questions, feel free. So it turns out when we're born, there is no symbolic consciousness. There is no mental realm. And I think the reason why you and I connected, and we're still friends after so long from Rio, is we connected based upon our interest in non-duality. And so when you do all of the inner work, and for you, you had this realization that underneath all of the stories and underneath everything, if you let all of that go, there's just awareness. There's just pure awareness. And a lot of the Eastern traditions, and actually a lot of the mystical traditions, talk about this as well too. But the big challenge behind this is there's a difference between knowing something conceptually and knowing it experientially. And then for you, when you were facing literally life or death, you kind of got to this point where, hey, you know, priority is wise. And so arguably when you were born, there was no symbolic consciousness. In fact, for those of you that have kids, there is no notion of object permanence. If you take a toy and you put it behind your back, you know, from a baby's perspective, the toy is gone. And when you bring it out again, oh, there's the toy again. Oh, the toy is gone. The toy is there again. They have no notion that there's an object that's behind your back. That's why peekaboo works with kids. Where did daddy go? Oh, there's daddy. Where did daddy go? Oh, there's daddy. And they get fascinated by that. And so initially consciousness becomes aware of itself. Then it becomes aware of the physiology. And then it becomes aware of the surroundings. And then you realize that there are objects in the surroundings. And then there are relationships between the objects and the surroundings. And then from that comes symbolic consciousness. And what happens for each of us is experiences in space and time bind symbols and thought to processes in physiology. And so what happens is what's this? What is all this? Where am I? What is this? You know, you start experiencing the world as a baby, and then certain sensations start correlating. I feel this, I feel this, I feel this. Oh, that's a wee-wee. We call that a poo-poo, a breast, milk, mother, father. And as you experience the world, you start building a mental worldview. And so the physiology tries to maintain homeostasis, which reinforces a mental worldview, which motivates action, which influences how I feel, which reinforces a mental worldview. And so I start building this mental worldview. Just like they say in the material world, there was nothing, there was a big bang, all this hydrogen and all these galaxies. Consciousness becomes aware of itself, and you start building this mentally constructed worldview. And then very quickly, the mental worldview dominates, drives you, versus what's physically around you. And so we're in thought, we send our kids to school, and what happens in the first stage is our parents lay their conditioning on you, their conditioning on you, the education system lay their conditioning on you, and society lay their conditioning on you, and you buy into consensus reality, but you're fragmented. And so for most people, I'm juggling between my family, my work, my hobbies, and work-life balances, trying to reconcile all of this stuff while keeping all the plates spinning. But then, and what happens usually is you know, I had a bad day at work, I go home, I make love to my wife, or I hug my kids or something, and I get my fix there, and then I feel better. And so I'm doing all of these behaviors because that's what I've been conditioned to do, and that then makes me feel a certain way. And I'm just there to regulate my biochemistry based upon how my parents initially patterned me when I first came into the world. And so stage one is I buy into consensus reality, but I'm fragmented. And what happens is your ego then kind of keeps you locked. You're going to go and you're going to notice, hey, I'm going to get a new job. I'm going to finish this book, and you're going to work on it. It's like, oh no, there's all this other stuff. I get distracted. And so your ego kind of keeps you locked. And so as you try to do something, your unconscious and subconscious is going to try to pull you back down. And you're just kind of moving into what feels familiar, and you're just trying to maintain your current state. And that's the role of the ego. And gradually we move to higher energy states. And that's what I call the flow state. And so people, they go skiing, they go surfing, they drive fast cars, they do all of this stuff. Why? Because when I'm doing this, it kicks me into this heightened peak performance state. I'm very alert, I'm very present. I know that as I'm skiing down this hill, you know, one small move and I'm dead. I have this feeling of freedom. I have a connection to nature and everything. And that's what drives us. That's what we become addicted to, and that's what we crave, is this, and it's the context of this that kicks us into that state. And so whether it's surfing or driving a fast car or whatever it is, that kicks me into this peak performance flow state. And so the energy system grows and my psychology develops. And so the energy system of the body grows. And so stage one is I look at consensus reality, but I'm fragmented. Stage two is what happens is eventually people get to a state where they realize consensus reality, hey, you know, this environment, the way that we keep living this way, is not sustainable. We have global warming, we have plastic in the oceans, it's the Me Too. Something happens, and then you decide, hey, I'm gonna do something about it. I'm gonna go all in on one thing. And so any true artist, any true scientist, any true entrepreneur, what happens is I'm gonna go all in on one thing, which is what you did, you know, with your first company and everything. And when you do that, all these different fragments consolidate into one, and then your whole endocrine system and autonomic nervous system become coupled to your perception of this one thing. You're thinking about this nonstop, day and night, and then when it goes up, let's say I get funded and everything, I feel great. Let's say it goes down, you know, I get accused of sexual harassment, or, you know, my CFO takes all the money, or, you know, I feel down, and then, hey, you know, we only have enough money to last another month, or else we have to shut the doors and everything, and, you know, that kicks the energy up as well too. And so all of these symbols are tightly coupled to my physiological processes that are heavily attenuating my my nervous system and my endocrine system. And I'm thinking about this nonstop. And so what's happening here is all these things consolidate, and your ego kind of keeps you locked. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to make a run for it. And so as you try to do something, your subconscious is going to go, oh no, let's do it tomorrow. Oh, hey, you know, oh, there's this other thing I could be doing instead. And all of that is trying to keep you kind of locked, and you have to generate enough momentum and enough inertia to kick out of this. And when you're high energy, focused, and open, surreal shit starts happening. So coincidences, synchronicities, for many people that are open, they realize, wow, highly improbable things start happening. And I may lose some people here, but you realize that there are bigger forces at work. So coincidences, synchronicities, all these things start happening, and you realize that there are bigger forces at work. So my wife is taking my plate now, part of the things that are showing up and the bigger forces at work. And that realization that there are bigger forces at work, that nature, you know, it's like the reality that you've been told is not the reality, and you've experienced it. You've had some experience, highly improbable things start happening. You're like, oh my gosh, you know, hey, there's something beyond everything that I've been told. And I know this experientially because it happened through me, and it's a very personal thing. It's not believing something, a book or something like this. It's an experiential knowing, which is very different from a conceptual knowing. And that realization that there are bigger forces at work kick you into stage 3. Now, what happens in the challenge for stage 3 in this is that in stage 1 and stage 2, you're driven largely by stories, and it's the stories that are regulating your physiology. And so burnout, mental stress, mental disorders are basically high energy tied to stories. So little things amplify tremendously, little things that are happening where other people that are grounded are like, oh, that's just the wind. Like, no, you don't understand. That's, you know, and so they're reading into things a lot. So there's a big amplification of the energy and the physiology tied to story and meaning. And the issue is that the awareness doesn't know the difference between what's coming from this mental realm and what's coming from here. And so when you have high energy and surreal things happen, and I have a tight coupling of my belief system to the physiology, that's where mental health problems arise. So burnout, depression, bipolar disorder, manic depression, psychosis, all of these things are the inability to regulate affect in physiology because of traumas, usually early traumas that amplify, that are tied to the story and how I frame things and how I perceive and process and frame things. Now, what happens for people is that when they hit stage 3, surreal things happen. And then what happens is a lot of people are like, oh, wow, what are the chances of that? I get it. And they might start getting downloads and everything. And then what happens is that they try to figure this out, and then even more surreal things happen. And as the energy goes into this mind mental area, even more, they end up in a positive feedback loop. And then pretty soon they're not eating right, they're not sleeping right. And then pretty soon the physiology can't maintain this energy state to be operating at this level. A lot of people that are very disciplined can perform at a very high level, but for a seeker or someone that's really pushing it and really exploring, they end up in a positive feedback loop. Things change drastically very quickly. The physiology can't maintain that, and then there's a crash, which is typically, they call it the dark night of the soul. It's because your energy system are driven by your beliefs, and it's kind of like a souffle. It's all air inside, and it's based upon your mental understanding. And as soon as that thing pops, as soon as something inconsistent within, and it can't maintain its consistency, the whole thing is going to collapse. The whole energy system collapses. And then, because I've been driven and the underlying emotions driving it, usually the underlying emotions motivating the action or some form of fear, need, or desire, when that can't maintain, the whole thing collapses. And then that's where you have depression in this dark night of the soul. Now, what has to happen in this stage is you have to decouple the influences of the symbols on the processes of physiology. So your beliefs in stage 1 and stage 2 are kind of like scaffolding to build the energy system up in the body. And what happens is you have to, in order to decouple the influences of symbols on the processes of physiology, is very difficult because it's effectively psychological suicide. And the reason why it's difficult is all of these symbols and its meaning is implemented by the same physiological mechanisms that are keeping your body physically alive. But the issue is your awareness doesn't know the difference. So when you start yanking on this, it's going to start yanking on your emotional energy system. So anyone that ever had a first love, and when you broke up, I don't know if you remember, but that girl in college or something, oh, she's the one and we're going to get married. And then when you guys broke up, it's like, oh, life is meaningless. I don't know what to live for anymore. There's no meaning more in my life. She was my everything. I don't know. I don't even have a reason to get out of bed anymore. It's because of what she represented to you. And arguably the person is still alive. They may just be someone with someone else, like maybe even your best friend. But I'm getting too personal here. But what happens though is that they're still alive, but what they mean to you and what they represent to you, and in terms of its implementation in the physiology, has vanished, and there's that vacuum in that hole, and life becomes meaningless. Now, what has to happen is that underneath the stories, if you let go of all the stories, rewind the tape all the way back to the beginning, at the very core of your being, at the very core of everyone's being, there's an inner experience that's present within everybody. And the only way I can describe this experience with words is that right here and right now, it's good to be alive. And if you can feel that joy, wonder, gratitude, compassion, everything comes from that. And if you really feel into it, compared to being physically dead right now, this is amazing. And so there's a vast reservoir of energy that you can connect to. And the objective is to connect to that and then know the difference, be able to discern the difference between what's coming from here versus what's coming from thought. And if you can fully decouple the influences of everything and let everything go, then the only thing that's left is what's physically around you and how your body feels, which is what it was like when you were a baby. And in Christian terms for me, that's what it means to be reborn. And in Eastern traditions, that's Buddha underneath the tree. So if you know the story of Siddhartha, he's this prince, he leaves, he tries to end suffering, he goes with his ascetics, no, that's not it. And finally he's like, okay, I'm just gonna sit underneath this tree and I'm gonna figure this shit out. And so he sits down, and then Mara appears, and then the daughters of Mara, all this desire, all these hot women. You can imagine if Donald Trump were sitting there, Mara says, hey, you can become president of the United States if you get up right now. And he's like, okay, kind of gets up, but Siddhartha still sits there. And then all of these fears, these soldiers, they shoot arrows, they turn into flowers. And then Mara shows up, and Mara asks, who's here to witness your enlightenment? And then Siddhartha responds, the earth is here to witness my enlightenment, because I know the difference between what's coming from here versus what's coming from thought. And I can let all of this go. And so it's no easy feat because it's effectively psychological suicide, and you have to let go of everything, psychologically speaking, and its influence on your physiology. But if you're able to do that, that kicks you into stage 4, which is the mystical path. So initially, things happen out here. When you're a baby, things go through and you start building a mental worldview. And so information goes like this. Now, for most people, it's my thoughts and my beliefs. I act through the physiology. I engage the material world. Reality then responds, which influences how I feel and how I think. So I'm doing this, expanding my worldview and refining my knowledge, and then expanding my energy and my understanding. When I fully decouple, it's back to this. I sit here, hey, Gino, why don't you give a talk? Or, hey, I feel like eating this. Or I go, things just start showing up in thought based upon how things are responding. And then you try them out. It's like, hey, I have a feeling I should go to this place right now. I don't know, but I have this feeling. Something in me is telling me, hey, something about her. I have to go talk to her. Something in me is saying I should go talk to her. And so you get these things and then you try them out. And it's a process of refining intuition. Something shows up, you try it out. It either happens or it doesn't. And so the way I like to describe this is it's kind of like throwing darts against a dartboard. You get this dart, hey, I feel like I should throw it. You throw it, and initially you're missing the wall, then you're hitting the wall, then you're hitting the dartboard. And then if every dart that you throw is a bullseye, if everything that you intend happens, that's pretty good. And then that leads you to stage 5, which are the special abilities. And so if surreal things can happen and it doesn't faze you at all, then you can develop special abilities in a grounded way. And so the human potential side is I research people with special abilities. And so these include seers, people that can tell you things about yourself. It's like they have different forms of knowing, intuitives, medical intuitives, empaths, different forms of knowing. The other are people that can mess with your phenomenology in certain ways. They have energy, they can mess with your body, they can mess with your phenomenology, they can make you experience different things simply with their presence. And so that's like another type. And so a lot of the healers, the Reiki healers, a lot of these Qigong masters are kind of in that category. And then there are people that can move things with their minds, telekinesis and this kind of thing. And so I research these kind of people. We kind of go around the world identifying people, and then we're developing research methodologies and looking at this. Now, some people are born with special abilities, but then they become suppressed in stage 1 when they start being encultured. Oh, you can't see auras, these things don't exist, etc. Some people, when they pop from stage 2 to stage 3, when they go high energy all in, they develop special abilities. But because they haven't let go of their attachments, their energy system isn't very stable. But if surreal shit can happen and it doesn't faze you and you can be very still and very present with it, then you can develop these abilities in a grounded way. And so that's the human potential side. So personal development is kind of the developmental psychology of things. And if you look at, so those of you that have kids, there's Jean Piaget, who looked at developmental psychology. There are people like Claire Graves or integral theory, which are looking at the difference, how your worldview changes as you live your life. And so there's a lot of studies like that. And then the mental health part is when things go awry. And then for me, I think the thing that really helped me through my process was Qigong. And then meditation, Qigong, diet, all of these things, there's a process of cleansing, which I think is what Chinik care is a lot of that is about as well too. And then there's the human potential side, which is just nascent. And right now we're just, Western science doesn't fully believe or even understand this. And it's something I think the opportunities, especially for us in the East, we have a different tradition. I don't know if your audience knows, but the Western framing of reality and the Eastern framing of reality are very different. In fact, on Saturday, I'm giving a talk on the Eastern and Western responses to COVID. And the Western framing of reality is, this is me, this is all not me. I'm going to go explore, conquer, discover, and then God or someone will judge me later on, which is a material kind of Western me and this framing of reality. The Eastern framing is this is me, but I'm part of this, and I can't explain who I am without explaining what this is. And the journey there is an inner journey. And because of that, the practices and the understandings are very different. And part of the work here in Hong Kong that we're trying to do too is really look at things from an Eastern perspective and then come up with new sciences and researching this second-person research methodologies.
So we've got a question here. Is storytelling culture a negative influence on this? Does it limit our beliefs?
Is storytelling culture
a negative influence?
Again, a large part of this depends on where you're at and where you're at in your development as well, in terms of the community that you're working with and for. And so part of the research that we're doing is what's actually happening when we're speaking to each other, even in language and communication like this. There's a lot, I won't do it now, but presence versus thought. Eye contact and engagement is very important. You've heard me talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to get into this right now. But the role of stories relates to, and the use of language relates to who you're talking to and what your objectives are. Okay? And the way I look at language, again, looking at things as physiology as hardware, what's actually happening when we're speaking to each other? When I'm speaking to you right now, I'm holding my physiology in a certain state. I'm uttering words. These words are getting digitized by the computer. They're being sent across the internet. You're hearing it. The electrical signals are going to your earbuds. They're vibrating. They're vibrating against your eardrums. And then your brain is processing the words that I'm saying right now and in English. And you can understand what I'm saying because I'm speaking English. But if I start speaking Chinese, 我现在讲国语的话，你可能听不懂我在说什么。可是有一些听得懂中文的人听得懂我在说什么。And all I just did was I just translated, I went into Chinese and I explained kind of what I'm doing right now in Chinese. But for those of you that understand Chinese, know what I'm saying, and so all I did was shifted dictionaries, and you're still able to track me because you can do the translation because it's within your embodied knowing. And so what's actually happening when we're speaking is it's my body and your body. You actually have to match my energy, and if what I'm saying is within your worldview, you can stay with me and you can understand me. But as soon as I say something that's not in your worldview, you're going to disconnect from this and you're going to go into your own thought process. But what's actually happening when we're speaking is it's a physiology to physiology experience. And so the storytelling culture and what you're doing with storytelling and what you're doing with like visioning, if I'm a company and I want to get everyone on the same page, or if you look at religious traditions, religions basically provide a common semantic reference for a group of people to communicate inner experience. And so if we're going to grow together as an organization with a common vision, stories and religions are very important towards that, to be able to provide common stories that we can reference to talk about what we mean and what our experiences are. Now, for a stage 1 person, have you read this book? Have you seen this? This is the story you should live by. And it's basically getting them up to consensus reality and getting them to the edges from not knowing anything, or arguably knowing everything, but not being able to communicate it, to knowing how to perform, speak, and engage in modern reality. And so there's a learning process and an enculturation process. You weren't born knowing that red light means stop and green light means go. These are all things that were developed that allow you to function in modern society. And their storytelling is very important. And language is important for that. Now, for a stage 2 person, if a person is all in on one thing, the way I use language, I'm not going to criticize this per se. If I do, I'm going to try to do it constructively. Because if their mission in life is the Me Too movement, or if their mission in life is Black Lives Matter, and then I come in trying to put a deeper truth in, like all lives matter or Chinese lives matter, they're going to react violently against me because their whole their belief system is tied to their nervous system. And if I tax something in their fundamental core belief, they're going to fight violently back against me because they're trying to keep this together and they're trying to push really hard on this. And so what I'm going to do is, hey, have you read this? Have you seen this? You know, there's this, oh, this person might be able to fund you, you know. And so it's basically keeping the rocket moving forward and keeping them open. You don't want to distract them with other things. Now, for a stage 3 person, where they know that there are bigger forces at work and they know it experientially, the objective here is to take them out of story completely, right? You don't want to give them more stories. And it's really reconnecting them to, you know, hey, you don't seem really happy right now. You know, what's going on with you? What are the inner feelings within you? And what's going on within your psychology? And it's really about reconnecting them to the innate joy of being and then getting them back in their body and being present. Are you aware of all the dogs that just barked here? Are you aware of all the things that are happening around you? Are you aware of your breath? Can you do a body scan and can you maintain presence? And can you learn to live from presence with a focus and navigate the world in this way? Now, for a stage 4 person, if you've let go of all conditioning and the influences of thoughts on the processes of physiology, and all there is this, and you can be still and you can be very present, it turns out verbal communication is a very coarse form of engagement. And the way that you use language is primarily, what are we going to do together? And does it happen or not? It's asking a collective question to the universe. Because I'm not attached to any outcome. I'm just glad to be here. And I'm very reverent. And I'm glad for this. And I'm noticing, even as you sat back, the lighting on your change, I'm aware of all the subtle things that are happening. And I'm just listening.
So in terms
and
of...
so stories are important for stage 1, stage 2, generally speaking. And then the cultures will have an influence. And the issue around all of this, and the deeper thing around this, ties into, it gets very deep, ties into original sin. And the thing that initially thinks it's separate. And so what's happened is from, if you think of this mental realm that we're in, this is going to get philosophical very quickly. This mental realm, there's a guy that named Teilhard de Chardin. He calls this realm the noosphere. This mental space that we're in is the noosphere. And if you think of the material world, and then the ancient Greeks were very careful to distinguish between phusis, which are things that happen in nature, and techne, that have gone through the filter of the mind. So if you look at everything in my room here, everything here came from somebody's mind. You know, someone put this table, someone invented this computer. And so if you think of the material world, it's just phusis, which is nature. And what I mean by phusis again, the ancient Greeks, if a star in the heavens went supernova, they would say that's phusis. The star is acting of its own true nature, because nobody ever touched that star. It's just acting of its own accord. But everything that we see in most modern cities, or if you look at the room around you, all of that came from somebody's mind. Somebody invented this, somebody invented tape. There are all these inventions and all of these people before us. And so the material world is kind of like Minecraft, the video game Minecraft. It's basically the collective intention of everyone that's ever existed projected onto the material world. Now, in the day of Adam, and if you think of this noosphere, biblical Adam, or the first person who became self-aware, the entire noosphere was just their experience of the universe, right? There was no people before him. It was just them. And right now, as more generations come and each person completes a PhD, our knowledge, consensus reality continues to expand. Now there's this quantum theories and all this stuff. So all this knowledge continues to expand. Now, when we're born, we're effectively just like Adam, biblical Adam. And the education system in stage 1 to the stage 2 process is to get us to the edge of consensus reality as quick as possible, which is our education system. And for a PhD is, can you add a little bit of new knowledge to this? And for all of this, storytelling is important to get us to be able to understand and process and to support the 7 billion people we have on the planet. And to have this function in this way, that requires a lot of conditioned knowledge based upon all the other people before us. And all of this is created and enabled by storytelling culture. And so there are positive influences, and there are also clearly negative influences. And yes, it does limit your beliefs, but it limits your experiences, and it limits how you process and perceive the world, just like your past experiences have limited how you perceive the world. And the way I usually describe this to people is, if you've had many relationships before, usually the first relationship, and this is why early attachment theory is so important, your first experience with your relationship with your primary caretaker will influence all your subsequent relationships. And for me, after, these are pictures of my wife, we're still married behind me. This is about 20 years ago when we got married. But I know that all of the girlfriends that I had before have taught me something to be able to have the gratitude and the foresight and everything to have the relationship that I have right now. And what usually happens is, for people that go through relationships, is that your first relationship will condition you in a certain way. And then your second relationship, you're looking at it through the lens of the first relationship as well too. It's, oh, she did that for me, you're not doing that. And oh, this doesn't feel right anymore, etc. And so all of these beliefs that we have and our experiences will shape our beliefs and shape how we perceive things and how we process things. And all of this is done in relative terms because the ability to generate energy is limited. And so to be highly disciplined, as a concert pianist or a painter or something like that, is high energy tied to a specific discipline. And being able to discern little subtleties is what makes a great master chef from just a mediocre chef. A refined palate is something that's trained, and that requires very high levels of discernment that are very, very subtle. And the more subtle you can discern, the better an artist or better a chef you're going to be. And that's needed for refining a skill, but compared to physical death, or if I take those skills and apply it to relationships where, your glasses look funny, we're done, I can never date you again, whatever, and so part of it is to be able to maintain that energy, but then also be grounded. And the way you do that is you reconnect to this innate joy of being. And so if I can connect to the innate joy of being, right here, right now, it's good to be alive. And if I then can let go of all stories, what wants to do something? And then that's what enables stillness. And so everything that I do is going to be an idea with an emotion. If there's no emotion, there's no intention. And if there's no intention, there's no action. It's just an idea in my head. And so then as you're aware, and somatically, and this is where the body is important, and by looking at things in physiology, once you have something in physiology, it's objective and it's measurable. And so a simple thing in Chinese, if I ask you to breathe deeply from your belly, we call it dantian huxi. If I ask you to breathe deeply from your belly and try to feel angry at the same time, it's very difficult. Your breath relates to your emotional state. Anger is a chest breath. Fear is a held breath. But if I'm relaxed, the diaphragm is relaxed, and the autonomic, the first thing that locks up is your diaphragm, which changes your breathing. And you're going to notice, as I'm speaking to you, and if we maintain eye contact, you can actually be aware of your breath. And once you're aware of your breath, you're aware of your own emotional state. And you'll notice as soon as you go into thought and you start thinking about things, you're going to lose awareness to breath. and you're going to lose awareness to your own emotional state. And so the importance of presence in stage 3 and to be able to be present is to understand that relationship and then look at, from a story perspective, what are the underlying emotions that are driving this framing of story that's motivating me to act. And somatically, fear, need, and desire feel very different from joy, gratitude, and wonder. And so a lot of times, even here in language and communication, you know, if you said to me right now, hey, Gino, you're full of shit, get the hell out of here. I say, hey, Feisal, you're right. I don't know what I'm talking about here. Can you help me out? Then there's no conflict. If I can know the difference between the influences coming from this mental realm versus what's coming from here, and if I can stay grounded here, be aware of how I'm breathing, be aware of my own emotional state, and if I can stay grounded here and let this go, what could you possibly say to me to create an argument? Now, the only time there's going to be an argument is when there's an emotional attachment on one side bumping up against an emotional attachment on the other side. Now, if I have the awareness to realize, hey, this is just an emotional attachment to an idea of story, and I can let this go, then there's no conflict. And that's another problem with beliefs. You know, this is getting back to Ramia, is that emotional attachment on one side, and there is a grain of truth to both sides, but there's high energy, and usually it's going to be a negative energy of a fear, need, of desire of some sort, or a concern, which is a fear, or, hey, I'd like to see you do better, you should do things my way, I know better than you, etc. There's all of these things that are the dynamics around that. But if you can deconstruct it and look at what's the granularity of truth, and how do I interpret them as saying them trying to demonstrate their love and demonstrate their concern, and if you look at things in that way, then you can respond in a more appropriate way. Similarly, if by knowing what's triggering you and by understanding your triggers, it turns out you weren't born with this belief system. By seeing how you frame things, I can literally see your past trauma. And what I mean by that is that if I touch your arm like this, you're fine. But if you have like an open gash, like an open infected wound, and if I just touch a little bit, you're going to jump. And so what I represent to you and what the symbols of the conversation represent are touching a wound in your psyche, which then triggers your autonomic nervous system, which is then why you lash out at me, which then triggers my autonomic nervous system, which is why I lash out at you. And that's how conflicts arise. And so if you have the ability to be aware, stay grounded, say, okay, you're yelling at me, but okay, this is very interesting, you know, but not to take it personally, not to internalize it, go, oh, this is very interesting. What's going on here? And then respond rather than react, then relationships and a lot of conflicts can dissolve away, and you can come to common understandings a lot quicker. And you can be there for the people that you care for and you love. Because a lot of the times these conflicts are actually people that care for you very much, but you're talking past each other.
Yeah, but the whole thought, I mean, when you speak to people about relationship, they always say that you end up in a relationship in order to heal the wounds that exist, right? And therefore, the people that are closest to you are the ones who press those wounds and unfortunately create, you know, the responses or reactiveness that you just described. So, how do we maintain? Yeah,
and so knowing the difference between what's coming from here and cultivating greater somatic awareness, interoceptive somatic awareness, like how you're breathing, where are the tensions, where is the stress, you know, a lot of people are like, oh man, my neck. But even as the neck started, if you go, oh, hey, okay, back to this. And then if someone yells at you, just take that and then just take that energy and then just dump it. Just, okay, I apologize. Are you feeling okay now? How can I help you? How can I help you, you know, feel better? And so just responding to them rather than reacting. And the key thing about that is to stick with objective measures. Why am I here? What is this about? What are we working towards? And you have to be careful, especially these high stage 2 people, because when they are very, very sensitive, there's a big amplification, right? It's like a wound. If it's a mild wound, you just touch, oh, it's sore. But if it's like it's a deep gash or something, just one little touch and the thing will go off. There's a high amplification stage. And so it's just being very mindful of that. And then being empathetic, because what's actually happening when we're speaking, it's a physiology to physiology experience. And so as you're talking to someone, I know where I'm coming from. I know where I'm coming from in relation to this. And by seeing how you respond and empathizing with that and feeling that. And so I can talk to you like this, but I can talk to you here and this feels a certain way. But if I shift my breathing, if I go from here to just and what I'm doing here, I don't know if you, but I'm kind of shifting into sadness here. And if you're with me and we're engaged, as I shift into sadness, you're going to shift into sadness as well too. And that's what empathy is. But if I go into deep sadness and you have maybe, I'm dealing with the death of my mother or something, and you haven't really processed the death of your mother fully, and as I shift into that sadness, that's going to reawaken all of that stuff that you don't have processed. And some people are just going to go, oh, I can't deal with this right now. Hey, why don't you talk to a professional or something? Or I'm going to change the topic or something because I don't want to go there with you. And so part of it is, can you be with somebody and then really be with them, and then be with them in open and vulnerable and creating a safe space for engagement. And that is absolutely essential in relationships, and then even with an organization as well. And so part of the things that we've been trying to do in our work right now is, we're doing research and kind of these special ability stuff, but then we're also trying to reframe entrepreneurship and organizational culture by looking at it from the perspective of personal development. And some other things that we're doing right now, which are kind of exciting here in Hong Kong, is looking at building community in a post-COVID world. How do we bring people more locally and look at building communities, looking at things from the perspective of personal development? How do we collectively support personal journeys, especially with this global thing that's hitting us like COVID? Now that I think, Feisal, this is the longest you and I have been in Hong Kong together in our whole lives, where we're both in the same city at the same time. I think.
Yeah, between us, yes, but I was here longer when I had cancer. No, actually, I wasn't. I actually traveled. You're right. It's the longest I've ever been here.
The point behind this is that in a post-COVID world now, how do we find support? And then how do we find the local resources to help us move along?
All right, the whole hour has gone by really fast. You're, as we know, at a complete in that space. So what are the last words you'd like to share in closing remarks before we say goodbye to our wonderful families that have taken the time to be here with us?
Well, I hope this makes sense. And one of the things I really value for you too is CHINET care and what you're doing related to this, to making people understand the relationships between the psychology and physiology and health. And then the challenge here is, how do we improve all of the relationships, including the intergenerational relationships that happen, so that we can heal and truly work together to heal each other, to reveal the wounds and to be open with it, and to put the armor down and to create these spaces and to really look at the important things. And as we do this, and as we as individuals heal and learn to work together better rather than competing and all of this, look at, I don't know if that new Trump book written by his niece, all the family dramas and everything that go on to create these hardcore type A's. If we can then, come back and really look at, what are we doing, and what are we doing, individually, and then working together with the people I care for most, and then bringing that healing across, and then to the organizations and the groups that we're working with, will have a huge impact.
So
and
interestingly,
right now,
yeah.
and right now, it takes people like you that have gone through the process yourself to be inspired to, hey, I have this insight. This is what I want to do. And, I'm really excited to talk to you more about what we're doing in Hong Kong and then really looking at kind of scaling this globally.
Thank you very much, Gino. I mean, interesting enough, we have Anissa, not next week, but the week after on the 5th, and she's going to talk about the conditioned patterns and the beliefs from past experiences and even generationally. And we're going to have that conversation on the 5th of August. And next week we have Jonathan coming back looking at inner wealth and looking at what are some of the things that are actually not allowing us to go there. Like what are the inhibitors and obviously what are the opportunities. And then on the 19th, we have Michel Hugo coming back, really looking at sleep as the #1 element of the autonomic nervous system, right? That is the core, the rest and recovery element, and how we can, and looking at it in more depth. So thank you very much, Gino. We've gone slightly over time, but with you, it always flies. I hope everybody was able to follow you. If not, the recording will be sent so that they can try once again to connect the dots as we follow Gino with his incredible energy. So thank you very much, Gino, once again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you everyone for your time, and see you next week. Thank you.